Thanks, thanks everyone. Thanks, Alison. Hello, bonjour tout le monde. This is me, Anna, representing Youth Climate Lab, and also Naia is going to be speaking a little bit about kind of generally the work that we do, but also our infiltration manual and ways of engaging young people at the municipal level for climate action. So next slide.
Yeah, before we get started, just want to do land acknowledgement. The tweet that will shortly is now on the screen is a tweet by Indigenous lawyer Naomi Sayers and sort of helps us orient our land acknowledgements at YCL. I think a lot of us have the sense that land acknowledgements aren't enough, and so this tweet says, if you're a non-Indigenous person and you think that land acknowledgements aren't enough or you want to do something more or better, start describing your relationship to the land. Where did your family come from? How did you end up here today? What did you benefit, lose? What was gained or lost? This just helps us to set our intentions and orient our reflections and share stories in respect to the land. I think particularly as we at YCL and also many of you work in the space of climate action and climate justice, our work does really need to be rooted in our relationship to the land. And so this tweet and this prompt from Naomi Sayers can help us orient towards that. Next slide, please. This is also a resource that many of you may be familiar with. Nativeland.ca helps identify the lands that you might be on. I'm currently on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also known as Vancouver, BC. And Anna.
And yeah, kind of grounding myself in the last tweet that we had in the last slide. I am in Mexico, in Progreso specifically. I am from Mexico, and part of my kind of exploration and reconnection to the land, I realized that I understood more about my connection to the land in Canada than I did at home. So a few months ago, I made the decision to responsibly and safely move back to Mexico to explore some of that and the relationship to my ancestry and my family and what we benefited from as a white family in Mexico from the Spanish descent and kind of that process. So I'm currently in Progreso, Yucatan, home of the Mayans. So with that, I think today we just wanted to introduce a little bit of who we are, why we exist as in YCL, again, the infiltration manual and ways of staying in touch. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Anna. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the co-founder and managing director at Youth Climate Lab. Before, I used to work for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection Program, as Alison named, and as some of you may remember. Then I worked on their international programming side, and I was working with local economic development program in 6 countries. I also, before that, this is non-chronological, or like the opposite, I guess. I worked for Sustainable Waterloo Region and was kind of adjacent to the Climate Action Waterloo Region project when it was getting started and the plan that it turned into. And before that, I like to call it my gateway into climate change. I started with the municipality of Cancun, was my first introduction to climate action after I selfishly realized that the beach that I used to go play volleyball in where I grew up disappeared after a hurricane. And then I just got really interested in learning about climate and started volunteering with my municipality. So I have a very close relationship and ties to municipal work in that sense.
I'll introduce myself too. Hi everyone, my name is Naia. I use she, they pronouns. I am the Youth Climate Lab Communications Coordinator, and I'm also an organizer with Sustainabiliteens, which is the Metro Vancouver-based youth climate justice group, as well as Climate Strike Canada, which is a network of local youth climate justice groups across the country. And part of my work with those 2 groups has been coordinating the youth response to Vancouver's Climate Emergency Action Plan, CEAP, which I think was mentioned earlier as well. Next slide, please. Just give you a brief introduction to Youth Climate Lab. We're a Youth for Youth global organization, which is focused on transformative climate action. So what that looks like often is designing, piloting, and then scaling projects and programs to enable young people to build the just and climate resilient futures that we deserve. Since we've started in May 2017, we've worked with over 30 partners across the world, mainly to design and pilot those projects, and we've reached thousands of young people in over 77 countries. And I'll pass it to Anna to talk a little bit about the history of YCL.
Yeah, so why we exist and why we started. We like the slide. We started because we felt frustrated. We felt frustrated with the pace of scale and solutions not really meeting the needs of the problem, right? The scale of the actual problem. I was personally frustrated with the lack of meaningful inclusion of young people and other marginalized voices in the climate conversations that I was privileged to be a part of. So it kind of started with this idea of I had been more involved in the local and bottom up level. Dominique, my co-founder, had been more involved in the top down policy level. And that's kind of how we decided to, oh my God, create Youth Climate Lab. And I just briefly will present a bit of our theory of change. But as I mentioned, our work is mostly to enable young people to reimagine and rebuild systems that are holding in place climate inaction, and so that together we can build a more just and climate resilient world. The way that we work is kind of a threefold approach. The first one, we focus on shift on skills. So we equip young people to kind of transform their communities and build the future that they want. The second one is policy, and this relates to the infiltration manual that we'll be speaking about, but really creating the opportunity to understand, demystify, make it accessible, and at the same time access and influence climate policy. I just want to make a little note in our kind of like images there. You see a table. I think when we started, what we were shooting for was a seat at the table. And the more that we started getting seats at the table, we realized that some tables actually needed to be broken or reshifted or start a new table that's radically more different and effective and really inclusive. So we're kind of in this in between of still participating in existing systems and making sure that voices of young people and other marginalized communities are represented there, but recognizing that a lot of these tables may just need to look differently as we move on. And then the last shift that we touch on is the finance shift. So really disrupting capital flows to be more equitable and really address the needs of young people. This was something that we were seeing, continue to see almost systemically and all across youth-led efforts, is that they're underfunded and not trusted while they're also delivering a lot. So I'm glad it was mentioned earlier. Honorariums, that's like one of the earlier, like key things to really compensate for some of these voices and inputs, but there's a wide range of levels of financing that are needed for youth-led solutions and youth-focused solutions. Next.
So I'll introduce a little bit about the Infiltration Manual, which I think some of you might be familiar with. The Infiltration Manual was created through an intergenerational collaboration between a youth steering committee. So guided by YCL, it was a group of young people who had experience doing climate advocacy or taking local climate action, and then collaborating with Climate Caucus, the group of climate-friendly counselors across the country. And generally, it's a guide to demystify and guide youth in taking steps to address climate change at the municipal level. So it looks like mainly it's divided into 4 sections, and it's a toolbox of options that can allow youth to identify and to be able to access different methods to push for more ambitious climate action.
Sorry, this takes a second. So the next slide is a bit of an important note that we added at the beginning of the manual, and this came mostly from the youth committee that Naia named. And I think it's important to read and almost read word by word in this session against best practices with presentations, just to recognize what a lot of young people feel in this space. So it's important for us to name that the municipal system is rooted in colonialism and has historically and systematically excluded BIPOC voices. It has also been built around important barriers of access to other identities. And while we hope that in the process, it's made more accessible, it's still our first priority that young people that receive this information and that go through our workshops and activations of this particular manual know that their well-being and safety is one of the first, or the first key thing that they need to be protecting and fostering. The last bit there just says participation from the streets to the ballot to city council meetings is a step towards a government that better represents us all. And I do want to maybe start with this, but also have this note carry through the presentation, especially with you folks as an audience, as something that we can all kind of like create a safer spaces for young people to feel included in these municipalities. So next, we're going to do a bit of a overview of what the manual has, and then I'm not going to go too into detail because I'm sure you've all gone through every page of this manual. But essentially, we start with how municipal governments work. This is the 101 local governments. This was heavily built by Climate Caucus and some of the counselors that work with them. So it talks about the main players, how decisions are made, and what municipalities actually have within their jurisdiction. The next step is finding and mobilizing supporters. So this is a pretty transferable, I guess, section of the manual in terms of building momentum and building support for particular projects or initiatives. And it talks about how to build ecosystem of partners, really leveraging your existing networks and tapping onto new ones. We, through the manual, provide a number of templates and kind of other resources that young people can access, or anyone that's accessing the manual. The next step is from meeting with council to getting clear commitments. So this is kind of the step of taking it to council and really trying to navigate that system and navigate how and where one can actually have areas of influence and impact. And then the last one, and my personal favorite, is knowing your worth. So this really touches on self-care, youth representation, and just wellness as a whole. This together with the note at the beginning that I read was kind of the key points that the youth committee really wanted to make sure were included in the manual. We all knew that a lot of this information could be found from different sources. You could eventually understand how municipal government works, but this is what the young people in the committee that helped us build this would have said to their younger selves when they were starting this work. So if you want to get a sense of that, I'd suggest, yeah, you probably know 1 and 3, go into 4 and see where young people are at and what our current concerns are when it comes to engagement. And honestly, as a kind of guide of potential pitfalls and how to avoid those.
Yeah, so I know that it was mentioned before, but there really is a need and a value in engaging with young people in terms of climate action. We're really well positioned to be pushing for ambitious work, and so when young people are worried about our futures, it brings a greater sense of urgency to the table, and it creates opportunities for conversations around what we might owe, both on a moral and a relational level, to future generations. I've had a lot of experience with working around common values. I think not only in terms of electeds, but also in terms of other folks who might be collaborating on local climate action who might not necessarily see eye to eye, or might not necessarily work together, but will collaborate when youth are leading or shaping that process. And like with urgency, like I mentioned, when young people are leading the conversations, everyone's idea of what is possible and what is needed to tackle the climate crisis expands. And so the bigger our imaginations, the more things are possible. And the more things are possible, the better chance we really do have of taking action at the scale and the speed that science and justice are demanding that we do.
Thanks, Mariam. So just a quick what's next for us with the manual. The manual launched a couple of months ago and it's kind of out there in the world now. Our mission and intent is to continue to push that out, to make sure that it's being shared, that people know that this exists, but also activating it. So turning this tool and very kind of like piece of PDF into a practical, useful resource. So we've been doing this through a number of partners. Climate Caucus, as it was mentioned before, were our co-designers and co-led this project, but also through the David Suzuki Foundation, City Hive recently, and ourselves. So we're exploring ways of really putting this in the hands of right people and making sure that this is leading to tangible action at the municipal level. Right now for us, we're focusing on what are the pre-manual needs. That's really weirdly worded, but essentially what I mean there is we recognize that the manual may be for people that already know what to ask, people that are already engaged, and people that we're just looking for a tool to really kind of summarize it and put it all together. What Youth Climate Lab is focusing on, and hopefully the next few months will result in, is understanding where young people want to be pushing for more and where the municipalities are at. So almost doing a comparative analysis between what asks should be going to councils and how to connect those with the right people. On that same note, we're exploring collaborations with municipalities to really understand how can youth help you advance your work. So an idea for this is maybe eventually turning this manual into more of a toolkit for municipalities to engage young people in a more meaningful way that kind of like mimics and parallels what the manual is doing from outside. So infiltration, and the infiltration manual is like tongue-in-cheek, like we're trying to play to the fact that young people need to learn the ways to understand it and access it, but by no means does it mean that we don't want to be working together with municipalities. On the contrary, the majority of the manual really covers how to best work with the municipality and the staff and the elected officials, and how to build those relationships so that they're strong. Wow, it's really loud here. So yeah, I think with that, the next slide is a little bit more of a call to action to all of you, and we'll get to finding ways of continuing staying in touch with us. But the first one, the first way that you can help is by sharing the infiltration manual itself. I copied it in the link. We want to make sure that as many people that should know about this know about this. With that, a lot of the times we've learned that actually hints on what young people should be pushing for are coming from staff. And you know this, you all know this. A lot of the time you just need that additional extra push from external stakeholders to make sure that it's passing on council, that elected officials are paying attention. So yeah, really build those connections with young people and share the infiltration manual with them, potentially as a sign of goodwill, but also a starting point to a conversation there. Naia, I think I used the first.
All good. Yeah, and then I think the last thing you can be doing in the meantime and always is distributing power and sharing power. Young people and others who are often marginalized by local governments can be tokenized super easily. And so one of the ways that we really do encourage both staff and electeds to be working with and reaching out to young people is avoiding clear and harmful disparities of power. So one of the ways that looks like or can be manifested is through using compensation or honorariums to honor young people and their time. But some other ways, just supporting us as we speak up for ourselves, not speaking over us, and recognizing our expertise, and then really just working towards building relationships and not just having sort of a transactional partnership with us, because I think at the end of the day, involving young people in municipal climate action work will always pay off.
Yeah, I'll just add to that in terms of sharing power, space and power. Yeah, like Naia mentioned, not just at specific times of consultation or when it's kind of marked in the plan, but really at all times. There's many ways that are identified in the manual, but also that you folks and we heard earlier today can ensure representation throughout and make sure that it's meaningful and that yeah, those spaces are safe. And again, I would encourage you all to read at least the last module in the manual to really understand some of the concerns from tokenism to feeling unsafe, and kind of use that as a guide to avoid those.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. That was a fantastic presentation. I learned so much. I can't wait to dive into the guide.